Yeah, Siddhi, do you want to start?
Sure. Hi. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Dear Peer number 3. Dear Peer is an online series. It's a webinar format where we discuss creativity and learning. Every time we host it, we try and create a panel which has a bunch of different personalities and people who do different kinds of things. But largely, the idea is to have people who are involved in education, in learning, in creative practice, and that's what we're again going to be doing today. Today we have with us Dr. Madan Meena and Sandeep Rai. Sandeep Rai has founded and runs the Circle, and Dr. Madan Meena is the Honorary Director at the Adivasi Academy, among many other hats that they both wear, and we leave it to them to introduce themselves further. And Amitabh and I from Creative Education at Srishti Manipal Institute of Art, Design and Technology.
Wonderful. So I'll just give you a little bit of an outline about our interest in this conversation and how we want to ground this conversation. We are part of this little odd program at Shishti, which is an undergraduate design program looking at education. The way we look at education, of course, is both inside the institution and outside the institution. We believe learning is lifelong. In fact, a large part of learning happens outside the institution. If you look at work and leisure, and if you look at how we learn to walk and how we learn to talk, a lot of it doesn't happen inside schools. We had certain core questions about what we are doing. Siddhi and me are both visual artists. I make comics, I paint large murals, I do exhibitions in the contemporary art context, and I am interested in education as a creative educator. And I think engaging with Sandeep and engaging with Dr. Madan Meena, it contextualized what I do, because I think what they both bring is this really massive imagination of both the world and the role of education and creativity in it. So yeah, Siddhi, a little bit about you, and then we can pass on the mic.
Yeah, sure. Hi, like Amitabh has said, I'm also a visual artist and I'm a visual communicator is how I usually go by. I like to use visuals to create access, that how can people access information they would otherwise not be able to access if it was not for the visual format, and the role that the visual plays when it comes to learning. And yeah, with that, let's pass it on to Dr. Madan Meena, and we'd love to hear from him to first
Thank
start by
you.
introducing himself, please.
Thank you, Siddhi. Thank you, Amitabh. And hello, Sandeep. Um I'm basically from Rajasthan, and my education has been to fine arts, so I'm a painter. But then my interest into various kinds of researches took me to different fields, and that too just to look at the understanding and knowledge among the Adivasi communities, nomadic communities, and denotified tribes. Though I myself come from the Adivasi community, and my first work that I started was to document and to my own community's art, because I couldn't find that in any of the art history chapters I went through my academic studies. Our vernacular arts are hardly represented, and tribal art is something which is not even thought about. So I started researching on it, and then later on, after finishing my studies, then I did this museum of brooms, which was a very different subject. So then another kind of understanding came about the ecology, about the culture of Rajasthan, looking through ecology and culture, how both are connected, and how the subject of broom become the center point of it. So that was an idea of late Komal Kothari, but that just took me to another understanding of this knowledge systems. And then later on, while working on it, I got into interest into oral traditions, and then met Dr. Ganesh Devi, who pulled me to his mega project of People's Linguistic Survey of India. So then I started looking at the languages, the diversity that we have through languages across the country. And while working on all these, I've been working with various cultural subjects, so textile, painting, crafts, all those things now. So that is my background. I'm a researcher. If you just want to identify me, I'm a practitioner, and then just a researcher on these such subjects. Thank you.
Sandeep, over to you. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, start off with a brief introduction. I guess that's okay, right? Yeah, I mean, so I was born and raised in the U.S. I grew up essentially thinking that I would go to medical school. I was a couple of months away from medical school trying to fulfill what was a lifelong desire at that point for the first 20 years of my life to become a doctor. Um, had a bit of an epiphany about 3 months before medical school and decided that I was doing it for all of the wrong reasons. And so I decided to teach. I taught in a school in the heart of Washington, D.C., in the US. It was like your quintessential public school. It was a school that was crazy. I mean, there were 238 schools in the District of Columbia in Washington, D.C., and this school was actually ranked number 238 out of 238 on academics, and it was ranked number 237 out of 238 on safety. And so a lot of people are like, well, what does that mean? A school is ranked 237 out of 230 on safety. And it meant that I was spending a lot of my time breaking up fights. It meant that police officers were roaming the halls every single week. It meant that kids were getting arrested. And I was close to the end of my first year and I thought I was going to quit. And I went to the principal with a proposal that 19 years ago felt exactly like the right thing to do as a 20-year-old. 19 years later feels a little bit brash. And I basically said, would you let us take over the school? And for some reason, she basically said yes. And so my co-fellow and I ended up basically retraining teachers, went door to door to 450 houses. We rethought the curriculum. We did all of these things to try to basically try to get the school to basically work better for kids and deliver on its fundamental promise. And our kids grew that year. They grew a lot, actually. And I don't say that to boast. They grew by about 20%. That was the most growth that they'd seen in a while. But I say that to say that it left me with this inkling that like change is just so possible, That school eventually was shut down. They actually ended up letting go of the principal. It was restructured. And they ended up basically opening up that school a couple of months later with a different principal, a couple of different teachers. And that school saw major jumps in improvements, right? It actually went from 237 and to the top 20 for a while. And I tell you that to say, like, I think that experience, it taught me a lot. It taught me that like schools have power, right? Like they've got the power to basically be transformational for kids. They also have the power to be catastrophic for kids. And we as adults oftentimes end up wasting that power. And we waste it basically oftentimes like, not intentionally, but we waste it because we basically stop asking ourselves, like, what do kids need and what does it mean to do right by kids? And is this preparing kids for what it needs to prepare kids for? And is it relevant for kids? Everything that I've done since then has been trying to chase that solution, right? I spent about 15 years of my career trying to help build and launch and grow Teach for India. And I now run an organization called The Circle. And what we do very briefly is we're on a mission to say, how do you reinvent what school is so that it works fundamentally better, especially for kids from low-income communities? And we're operating with this big belief that your top 20%, your most affluent schools across India they're innovating and they are reinventing and they are preparing kids for the future. But when you look at your bottom 50%, like most of our schools are stuck in a relic of the past. India has changed. It has evolved quite dramatically. Our schools, and I say this out of somebody that's been into schools probably every single week for the better part of 16 years that I've lived in India, our schools have stayed the same. Like they have not changed. And so we're trying to say, what does it mean to change them? What does it mean to get them to basically lean into the future so that our kids don't go obsolete? It's a little bit about me.
Thank you, Sandeep. I think it's a powerful opening statement, and I was just I think it really opens up the conversation in many, many, many ways. And I feel right off the top of the bat, continuing how you were talking about your own journey, I feel, is there, I mean, we were right before you came, we were talking about the Eames report, the India report by Charles and Ray Eames, which sort of back in 1951 made a connection between institution and nation. where it said, and it was a proposal that later became NIID, but then which is now National Institute of Design. And uh, design and creativity and institutionalizing them had a certain specific role, or it had a purpose to it. Um, when you when you when you introduce both circles practice in your own mission, how would you define the new purpose that education has in, I wouldn't even say building the future more so, but as a current uh, space that uh, I mean, it's not a machine really, that there's no, it's not just input and output, but what is the promise of education to the vast population of this country, to both Madan sir and you? I think that would be the opening sort of the question. Sandeep, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think we've long accepted an argument in India and across the world, right? And that argument has basically gone something like this. And we don't explicitly say it, but it is implicit. And that argument goes, the most privileged basically deserve an excellent education, and they get an excellent education. And they basically get it because they can afford it, because they can pay for it. Everybody else, we just need to ensure get the basics. And it's in all of our language, right? It's how we talk about education, it's how we talk about what kids need. And look, we just believe that that is fundamentally wrong. And so what we've been asking ourselves is, well, then how does that need to evolve? Like, what would it mean to actually get the best to our most disadvantaged? Like, what would it mean to basically, before we start talking about purpose, to accept that education is not a commodity, that it is a fundamental human right. And it is a fundamental human right that basically every citizen should basically deserve. And so if we've been holding that, like, then it comes, okay, so then if that's the basic promise, if the promise is to accept that education is not a commodity, if the promise is to accept that basically everybody deserves something that is excellent, then what is the purpose? And I think we have to accept that the future is now, you know, that we are living in a day and age of very rapid change, right? And there have been a couple of social scientists that have written about this. There was this great article by, the director of Google engineering, a guy named Michael Simmons, who basically did this whole piece, added a lot to Yuval Harari's work on some of this, where they've tried to calculate the rate of change, right? And basically what they've argued essentially is that, like, we are seeing a rate of societal change that is faster than it has ever been, right? And what is fueling that rapid rate of societal change, and they're arguing that is exponentially faster than what it was in the 20th century or the 19th century. And what is fueling that rapid change is technology, right? It's able to basically fuel change at a rate that we've just never seen before, and that human beings haven't had to process before. And if we accept that the future is actually now, that this isn't preparing for some like science fiction world that may happen, 75 years in advance, but we accept actually that kids growing up, kids born today, are going to see the beginning of the 22nd century, right? And if we accept that, and actually the future is now, then we have to also accept that we can't be preparing kids for a 20th century world, right? Which means that we have to move beyond the basics, which means that we have to ask ourselves, like, what is relevant, which means that actually preparing kids for the future means preparing kids for now. That's one. I think two, we need to basically accept that, like, we have long accepted this notion that school is to prepare you for when you get older. And implicit in that notion is something that I find deeply problematic. It's basically that you have no autonomy and you basically cannot add any value to the world until you turn 18 years old, right? Or until you turn 16 or until you turn 21, right? And I just think that's like fundamentally like not true, right? Kids are capable of so much if we just listen to them and if we actually give them a platform. And so in my mind, I think the purpose of education needs to evolve to say, actually, we're not preparing kids for the future, we're actually teaching them how to live now. Right? I'm an adult. I'm still learning how to live now, And if we treat that as something, then actually maybe it's not like, oh, you're preparing for one day in the future. You're preparing for life now. and you're preparing to be able to add value and to be able to basically live in a community and to reform your relationship with that community now. And the third thing that I would add is that, well, I think we need to evolve the purpose to basically recognize that school, for the better part of history, has actually prepared kids to become a better version of myself, right? Everything basically that school is rooted in is this notion of me, right? How do I get better grades? How do I basically succeed? How do I climb the career ladder, right? How do I basically like figure out how to gain greater wealth? How do I gain greater knowledge and greater skills? And I think what's missing in that, and part of what we're basically seeing as a wider breakdown across societies across the world, is the element of we. And so what we need to ask ourselves is, how does school evolve to be able to prepare kids to be able to basically evolve with a better we, to reform my relationship with community, but also, and I think most importantly, to ask myself, what is my role in shaping that community? And what is my role in shaping the world around me? And think about how different the world would be and how different school would be if I grew up my whole time thinking that not tomorrow, not 25 years from now, but now I need to be thinking about how to shape a better community around me. And that I can actually do that in very small ways and very big ways every single day. And school is teaching me how to do that. We would actually have a generation of change makers. We would have a generation of kids who are actually thinking about what it means to be able to build a better world. And I just think we would be living in a fundamentally different time. So yeah, 3 purposes. Sorry if that was a little long-winded.
No, I think it was beautiful. It also sort of charges many other modes of conversation here. Madan sir, before we move on, we are also joined by Ramesh. Ramesh Kalkur, he's the academic director of Shishti. Siddhi, Ramesh, and me had a very interesting moment where for 3 years we worked with the Delhi government and we ran their schools for grade 9, 10th, 11th, 12th, the visual art curriculum. So, hi Ramesh, welcome to
Hi,
the.
hi. Sorry, I didn't switch on my video. I might have to switch it off because whenever I switch it on, it lags. So anyway, nice to meet all of you, Sandeep and Madan. Yeah, please carry on. Interesting conversation.
Yeah, Madan sir, would love to know your thoughts on
The
what is.
fundamental
Yeah.
promise of education.
Yeah, so see how to take on education, formal education, informal education. Formal education is schooling. Informal education, the education coming from the community, coming from the environment, coming from the society. That's the education. The role of school education is increasing day by day, and the role of informal education, the society, is decreasing day by day. Earlier, the percentage of education coming from the community was much larger than the school education that we are talking about today. But more and more emphasis is on the school education route right now these days. Even the schools claim that you just leave your kids to us and don't worry about it. This has been my own experience from the most elite school in Delhi, where my son attends that school. That you just forget about it and then you just pays a heavy fees and whatever it is. This is how the school claims that they are the only people to teach your kids. No? But now I tell you the situation 2022, I was part of the survey which Bhasha conducted on the nomadic denotified tribes in Rajasthan, Gujarat, and Madhya Pradesh. And the scene is like this: more than 50% children drop out by class 5 among these communities. Not even 1% children reaches the college education, means they do not pass out their higher secondary, and hardly 0.1% find any jobs in the formal sector. So now the challenge becomes, because the community that I'm talking about, nomadic and denotified tribe, they form 10% of India's population. So what will happen to those kids? Where they end up? So those are not absorbed by the formal sector because education is only appropriate for the formal sector. Okay, formal education is meant for the formal sector because there you are trained, you receive a technical training, you receive a management training, and then you are absorbed into those kinds of job areas. So for these kids who are coming from the informal informal education systems, or who are not able to qualify the formal education system, they do not fit into this. Now, what is that? Should we think that the knowledge system that these communities have is obsolete? It is of no use to the world? But what would I will say that they have the knowledge system which is very, very important for the sustainability of this planet. Who's going to think about it? They have that, they have the experience knowledge. But the issue is that we have not validated that knowledge system. It is very late now that some superficial efforts are being done for this Indian knowledge system in the name of Indian knowledge system. But who knows what is Indian knowledge system? It is not in the text, first of all. So if it is not in the text, then how you will include it in your school, formal schools? How will it find a space in the formal education system? It will not find. Our knowledge systems, our education has been oral. So far, it has all been in oral. Bhasha did a survey of languages and we came up with 780 living languages. Now the school education tell me in how many languages it exists across India. Not more than 2 dozen languages. If we compile all the scheduled languages, all the recognized state languages, that education only might be existing in some dozen languages across India. Now NEP has come, everyone knows it is legalizing the third language. But I tell you, none of the states are ready to take up their mother tongues now. They want English as a medium. This is a case of Northeast, where the maximum diversity of languages exist. But they want English to be the medium school because their kids will not get job in the formal sector. If they come up with a Khasi language degree, who is going to give them a job in Delhi or Bangalore or Hyderabad? No one is going to give them a degree. So the whole subject over here is this, that what kind of a education it has to be. You know, that will make a better future. The better future has to be a future that make glass buildings, or a better future which makes better management systems. What should be that? So it's a question always. What education has to be? It is a question for me also.
This was a right back at you moment. Wow. No, it's a paradox, and that's what I mean. And the thank you for mentioning the NEP, because we had certain. I mean, we wanted to understand that a little better, and we thought, who better than Sandeep and you, sir? But like I was saying, Ramesh, Siddhi, and me, we also ran a small project for just about 3 years with the Delhi government, where firstly we understood the role of creativity, because otherwise, in a creative institution, you're like a monk in a monastery. You feel that this is the world. It's a very dangerous place, art and design institutions, because it gives you very misplaced social understanding of creativity, because there you are in a art affirmative space. And so that was an eye opener. But I think what we also realized was, when you talk about art and design as being two very distinct subjects taught at school level, they are charged with very different ambitions, and this sort of yielded a very clear fault lines, that even if we can, and I don't know, Ramesh, if you'd like to also talk about this, where uh, uh, our student from like the Delhi school, the affordance for design education at a higher level was very small. It wasn't impossible. Many students also applied to Shishti and ID and stuff, but that was a minority, and that made got us thinking about this gap between school education and higher education, or really got us thinking about this 3 to 23 bracket. Sandeep really highlighted quite nicely and very interestingly how uh, there are what the non-Darwinian cognitive evolution. I think that's the term that a colleague explained, where this idea of, let's say, maths curriculum being a certain way for grade 5 and grade 6 and grade 7 and grade 8 is based upon a certain linearity upon which the mind can sort of deal with complex information. That, I think, and I totally agree, has changed and shifted. uh, and yeah, so my what I'm trying to ramble into is really a broader sense of, like, is there a broader system that needs to be brought into, like, not question, but conversation perhaps, which is not beyond school, beyond college, but this entire promise of work, or the promise of education itself. Siddhi, would you frame it differently?
No, but I mean, I think just linking it to what has already been said is this idea of where is learning happening and where is it leading. So when we say that it is not leading to the metropolitans or the big buildings in the metropolitans, and if this was the system was to change, then where would learning lead to? So I think just tying it back to that where learning happens, and as we have spoken, when it's happening in both formal and informal spaces, what is this system of where learning is happening and where will it be applied? And Sandeep has questioned that already to say it has to be applied as it is being learned. But what are these systems where this exists? That's how I would frame the question.
Yeah, Ramesh, Madan, Sandeep, any one of you wants to have a crack at it?
Yeah, just to kind of, sorry again for my video not being there, and I joined a bit late. I could get what Sandeep was talking about. Lot of interesting points between both of you. I mean, I was just kind of trying to see what we were trying to do in that Delhi government project, or my 20 years of work at Susti. It's not just because we are in the visual art, but I just feel that, I mean, I always felt whenever we put things together over the years in the way we put the curriculum together, we always felt that we're looking at the building the idea of world, hence the idea of perspective within this learning or teaching learning space. That's one. It's basically many times when I've seen students coming in, you always felt that what they lack is the kind of idea of the world and the perspective. So it's interconnected. Another thing we constantly fought with the system also everywhere, that we are also looking at idea of imagination, hence the dream. So how they are interconnected. Again, why I learn what I learn, it's not one is to one, in the sense it's not about, okay, I learn this and I'll get a job here. I think that's even in this fast changing world, I think it would be very narrow way of looking at education. Uh, I think we need to more and more push towards idea of how can I imagine, how can I dream. While I know on ground there are various um, logistic or realistic issues, but I think if we leave that out, imagination out, then I don't think there is anything in the education. And maybe the third thing is idea of rootedness, where society, community, and culture kind of meet. Um, I'm not saying anything new. I think everybody is trying to do many of these or some of these, and or many components of curriculum, whether it's undergrad and postgrad, I mean, school level or undergraduate level, does look into these aspects of rootedness, imagination, and world building. But I don't know whether at times I feel we are really confused in the way we have put things together. Sometimes I feel that uh, we try to do too many things, and then try we try to take ownership of their learning, and that's where I think it's kind of gets confused. The gap between people who are putting curriculum together and the generation, it's somewhere Sandeep pointed out. uh, that gap is also sometimes might be the issue. We don't know how they learn. We don't know how they imagine, how they uh, put the perspective of the world together. We don't know what is for them, what is the rootedness to the culture, society. And this confusion sometimes leads to a huge gap in what we are trying to do and what we are trying to achieve, but not able to achieve. Yeah.
On that bright note, uh, I was very keen. I think we were all really puzzled about the NEP. We've covered the NEP in the magazine as well, and I think Siddhi and me had both very very different approaches to sort of bringing that into conversation. Siddhi, please. I think I'd I'd proceed after you.
Sure. And I think it links to what we were talking about right now. But I mean, I think one thing that strikes to me about the NEP is that it's a national policy. And like Sir just said, there is a third language, and there are just so many stakeholders that are involved that I can't even think about how it's going to get implemented and what will get implemented, what will get lost in translation, and what will happen. And I think it is the idea of scale that I'm getting at when it comes to education, learning, and policy. So I just wanted to, I mean, ask and open up this question to everybody, Amitabh, Madan sir, Sandeep, and Ramesh, is that when we are looking at learning, what does scale mean? And I think we're all looking at it, we're also working with it in different ways, like whether it is one institution and what does scale mean there, whether it was going to then school, Ramesh, in the Delhi project, is scale doing different demographics, and is that how scale is defined? Or Sandeep, when you are incubating or you are going through applications and when you are looking at new ideas of innovation and education, what is scale? How does scale work out? Or Madan sir, when you're looking at languages and formal and informal learning means, in at least in my head, in some ways it means non-scale. It means around me. It means close. It means personalized. So how do we talk about, or how do we think about scale and learning when they're both put in one sentence within the imagination that there is a national education policy that we have at our hand to be implementing? Yeah, whoever wants to take this first. And it's a more a thought conversation, not that any solutions will come out of this, but just what do you think? Sandeep, we'll start again with you since no one was saying anything. Or Ramesh, if you want to, you go ahead since you
Yeah,
unmuted your.
I'll just give it a try because we were talking about scale other day. I think I always felt that scaling up always marginalizes a fraction, whatever, fraction of something. So I think it's a tricky thing to scale up. But then India being India, where we are situated, I think we need to look at scale up in a different way. I think I never worked on this, but I just feel that decentralized scaling up is not centralizing something. Most of the time, people feel that I centralize, that's when I can scale up. And then, yes, it's easier if you centralize in order to scale up. I decentralized scaling up. We have NIOS, we have whatever, state board, central board, and Cambridge. You can allow many of these various things to exist at the same time. But most of the times, try many, whatever, the control system always wants everything to be aligned to each other and everything should become similar and same. And that's the problem of a scale. When you tries to manage scale, then you want to bring certain pattern which you can manage. So I just feel in any system that if many patterns can coexist, I'm calling for diversity, then it'll be good. So that's always my problem is always that scaling up leads to one. It tries to create everything to make everything into one pattern. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Sandeep?
So, if
Yes,
Sandeep is talking, then I can take it up to just to continue with Ramesh
wonderful.
comment. See, scaling up is a challenge and not a good idea also. But yeah, when we want to formalize things, then we need this methodology also. But decentralization is a solution, and this is also could be accommodated in the NEP, which is there now. Because what I see, like a simple thing about Chota Udaipur, where this academy or Adivasi Academy is based, and the problem that we have seen over there is that a person from, for example, a teacher who is from Saurashtra is appointed in Chota Udaipur, or maybe a Chota Udaipur guy is appointed somewhere in Kutch. Now the problem happens is that they are just from a very different cultural context. The guy from Saurashtra will not understand the Rathwi language. He will not understand the cultural context of the region, and he will not find interest in the school. So, because of that problem, what is the situation in these schools in this remote areas of this Chota Udaipur, that there is a very small attendance. So, we were approached whether we could increase the attendance in these schools. The challenge is not just education; children are not coming to school. They are all registered. Their names are there, registration is there, but there is no attendance. Now, what will happen to such situation? Na? So we propose that let us involve the community teachers in the school space. So the community teachers might be just less qualified, not be as qualified as the government teachers who are appointed in these schools, who might be just class 8 standard pass or something like that. So we were allowed to put them as a para teachers. Then we brought in the grandparent into the school space, something where how you can bring in the community into the school, because who is dealing with these kids? No, the parents basically, no, the grandparents or their parents. So if you bring into a grandparent who has a rich knowledge of the region, rich cultural knowledge, may not be a textual knowledge, may not be a knowledge of the text, but maybe the knowledge which I'm talking about, the knowledge has existed in the oral, in the orality. So we tried this experiment in these schools where we were asked to also establish some libraries there where we could develop some material in their local languages. So Bhasha has always been developing material in the local languages from the local context with people around in that area. And that material has been adopted by Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan also. That material has shown some good results. So this is a successful story that I can tell you from my region. And we have developed primers also for class 1 and 2, which are completely pictorial primers. Very less text, more pictures, belonging to their own cultural context, being done by their own people, not any illustrators from outside, but their own artists from that region. So I think those kind of decentralization, I think this decentralization is a solution to such situations, because this situation varies from place to place. See, this will not be same in Delhi. If you talk about Delhi, the situation will change. But if you talk of Chota Udaipur, the situation will be different. And then if you go to Rajasthan, the desert, the situation will be very different, where the distance is a challenge, where the climate is a challenge. So decentralization of the education might be a solution, might be a future solution we can look upon. Yeah.
Sandeep, over to you.
Yeah, this is a tricky question. Yeah,
No, but especially with the kind of work that you're doing, it's
yeah.
wide, it's diverse, it's serious. I mean, we've had the pleasure of engaging with some of the projects that you support. So yeah.
Look, I mean, my big, most predominant thought is like, can you think of how tough of a job policymakers who are trying to figure out how to basically shape education across 320 million Indian children have? Like my heart just goes out to them, honestly. Like if I had to really think about it, because when you look at the people who have drafted the NEP, like the people like these are a lot of like people who care deeply about kids and about education, and it's like it's not the easiest thing to. That's my most predominant thought as I'm sitting right now, and I think like I don't in my mind, right? I don't know if it's as easy as a centralization or decentralization. I think there's just some real tensions, right, that are like present that basically I think that people haven't figured out how to work through, right? There is like, how do you make sure that actually like there is a certain level of like minimum standard for kids across the country, right? And what's our most basic promise to kids, right? How do you deal with very significant capacity gaps, right, in governance and like how to run schools and like teacher capacity that exists all across the country, right? Like I think these are just very real tensions that policymakers face. And I think there's like a decent amount of like research that I think has shown that countries that have basically taken their educational system from poor to okay have taken a largely top-down approach. And then to go from okay to great, they've taken a more bottoms-up approach. So what I'm saying with all of this is not that I think that centralization and like a highly one-size-fits-all approach is the answer, right? But I do think like there's just some real tensions at the heart of it that I think people are holding, you know? If I had to basically offer like thoughts on how to cut through that, right? Like I think it's probably a mixture of both. Like I wouldn't say decentralize everything, but I also definitely wouldn't say centralize everything. I think there is a role for the central government and for any central government across the world to be able to play. I think there is a role for like, you know, a central ministry to be able to play. I think some of that role needs to basically be in how are we setting standards for actually the type of education that we should be delivering? Um, how are we actually thinking about like a common set of resources? Like, how are we thinking about smarter regulations? I think there's also a role for a decentralized level to be able to play, right? Like, how are we actually empowering people in local communities to have a say in education? How are we how are we empowering communities to be able to contextualize deeply? You know, I think a lot of this is very dependent on capacity, right? Do we have local leadership that can actually take and contextualize? And I think if I were like in a central policy making position, I would be thinking deeply about how are we building local capacity? Because that's one of the best things that we can be doing, right? Like that's actually what enables decentralization to be able to really like move forth, right? Is if we have local capacity that can actually lead and fundamentally shape and reshape, right? And so I would be thinking deeply about how do you actually build capacity at local levels. I would probably take an approach that I think is a mixture where like there are some things that, you know what, like maybe require a more centralized approach, but I would simultaneously be saying like, how do you actually just start to work quite strategically with nonprofits, with other efforts that can actually create as many proof points of excellence across the country, right? And so there are some things that we're going to hold century, but also we're going to basically like do many more public-private partnerships, you know, bring in nonprofits that actually can run schools really well. Try to basically get those, but then hold them to a set of standards, hold them to a set of outcomes, you know? Like I wouldn't let it completely go without regulation. But I would try to basically say, like, can we figure out how to get smart public-private partnerships in place that allow for structured deregulation, that allow for structured decentralization, you know? And that also basically allow for innovation and excellence to start to thrive from the bottom up. If I'm sounding a little muddled because I'm advocating for two approaches at once, is because I do think it's two approaches at once. I think it's basically saying like, how do you actually centralize in ways that are smart while simultaneously like encourage decentralization through really structured, well thought through public-private partnerships that basically enable people to be able to basically start to create from the bottoms up. Um, yeah, I think out of all of the countries across the world, like I think that I would probably put India as like one of the more complex ones to say like, how do you actually figure out how to make this work for 300 million plus kids?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a tough one. We had a public-private partnership with the project that we were part of. We had BCG work with the Delhi government. It's odd, strange kind of a space, but we did benefit. I mean, it was you can understand why. Like you can very clearly understand why. Because the sluggishness that is associated with state-run systems was absent, and I think that gave it some charge. We have one question from a learner from a cohort, but before that, I just wanted to sort of touch base on we've spoken about education, its purpose, NEP from a really, really incredibly broad and complex perspective. As someone whose primary skill is making lines, I'm I would I'm very keen to know how can I contribute? What role does creativity have in working through these paradigms of learning, education, its own social responsibility? I'm not talking about art per se, but I'm talking about art, design, creativity in that sense. Not just media owned. I mean, yeah, Madan sir, Ramesh, Siddhi, what does, I mean, yeah, do we have a role to play? Because the learner's question is sort of working around a certain privilege notion when you talk about at least design. Uh, you know, so yeah.
I think creativity is something that is there in the DNA of human beings. We have reached to this civilization because of creativity. So it is there. It's not that. Now, how to use it for these challenges? That's a that's a good question. So there are various ways that you can see this, but the most important is what I see always is to find solution for the immediate problems that you see in your surrounding. That is something each and every one of us can contribute. If I find a design is only meant for finding solutions, no? So the problem that you see immediate, I can't solve a problem of Ukraine right now sitting here. That doesn't fall under my domain, you know. But if a small problem of a garbage treatment is just lies to my next door, and if I'm able to treat that problem, then I can do that. So this is what we need to see. There has to be micro solutions, and that micro solutions can lead to the mega solutions. Yeah.
Sandeep, Ramesh.
Well, I think I already answered that question. That's why I took. I mean, I said creativity is imagination, and then how do you? It's important to build the idea of imagination, which connects to the dream. I already kind of answered that. I think there is space in. It's not about art or design. It's not about making pretty pictures or uh, making pretty objects, whatever. It's beyond that. The idea of imagination, for me, I feel that it comes from the creative field. And as I completely agree with Dr. Madan that everybody is creative, everybody has a sense of imagination. I just feel that many times we kill that through making education aim towards testing and examination and various things. And that's where I feel that we need to open it up, and there is space for creativity and imagination everywhere. It is already there, but I think we kill it through the process, as Picasso said. And I think uh, I was a better artist when I was a kid than now. It just basically when you kind of tries to, yeah, when you forget the intention of what you're doing, then you end up in some other place. That's what sometimes education does. So we need to go back and say, can we relook at why I'm learning? Yeah.
There's one thing to add. This is very metaphoric that I'm adding you that we were doing this film, Jhadu Katha, and while ending this film, we just went to the large dumping site of Jodhpur, outside Jodhpur. All the municipality waste go and was being dumped there, and we wanted to interview the the manager over there of that site. Very decent guy, very humble guy, and what he said, a surprise, and this should be a message for everyone. ही सेड कि गांधी जी ने कहा है कि देश में जो कचरा है वो तो इतना सा ही है अगर सब लोग अपना कचरा संभाल कर रखें. See how big thing he has said that the garbage only this much if you manage it. I do not know if Gandhi has said this or not, But this guy gave this message.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Sandeep,
Mm.
what can we do?
I mean, look, I'm a big believer that in the space of education, like design that isn't iterated and isn't piloted, like goes to waste, you know? And so my nudge to anybody that's basically wanting to figure out how do you bring creativity into the space and like what is a role would be to actually like, I don't know, go like try to start a school. Try to actually try to start an after school space. Like take that design and actually start to basically put it into action with kids, even if it's something really small, you know? Um, and if that's not, if you're like, actually, it's way too big of a jump, then partner with an entrepreneur. I can find you many, you know, to basically take that creative design space and to say, actually, let's see if this can actually do good stuff for kids. Because it's only when we start to pilot it and iterate it that we actually start to grow it. And we start to basically get like some of like our great thinking and our most creative insights to be able to basically like get tried with kids and then to basically grow into something beautiful. But that would be my nudge, would basically be like, I don't know, if you want to start a school, call me. If you want to basically partner with an entrepreneur to get it piloted, like I'll connect you to somebody. That would be something very concrete and very practical that I would say. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the generosity of time. Siddhi, any last questions? We are on clock, on time. Yeah.
Yeah, I have another big question. I think I can just leave you all with a question, maybe, and whoever has any thoughts can quickly jump in because I again think it's big. But I think at different points we've all spoken about agency and we've all spoken about leadership. Whether we are talking about decentralization or we're talking about top down and raising, creating capacities where the local, the cultural, and bottoms up approach can actually happen. So just the idea of how can this leadership be built? How can this leadership be taught as a skill? How can we have more people who are ready to lead learning? Whether it is the grandparents or it is people who, Sandeep, we would be very happy to put you in touch with, who want to start their own schools or who want to work or support schools that are coming up. Is the idea of leadership and change and dealing with change somehow. So yeah, how do we build leadership? How do we create that ecosystem where it's not just me and my role and what I'm supposed to do, but go beyond it? Amrita, please add to this question because we've been speaking about this for a while, and since we are leaving them with the
No,
question.
we have 3 minutes. We have three speakers. I'll hold my words. So let's just go with what our lovely guests have to say. Sandeep, Madan sir, Ramesh.
I'll give it a pass at this point of time. I don't know, somehow I lost track of it. Sorry.
Could you actually repeat the question one more time, Siddhi? Do you mind? It was breaking up a little bit for me as well.
Not at all. I'm saying that I think we've all spoken about leadership and agency and entrepreneurship in different ways, whether it was decentralization or bottoms up or building capacity when we're talking about national policy or any kind of change. So I'm asking you, how do we build that as a capability in our current learners? And I'm not specifying whether it's at school or college level, wherever they may be. So how do people who are learning right now realize that they will have to lead change or they can lead change and that they are in that position?
Got it. Yeah, happy to very quickly weigh in. I know we're close to time, but look, I think it's two things. I think it's one, how do we evolve the purpose of education from me to we, right? I think, which is what I mentioned a little while ago. I think the more that we can do that, the more our entire lens shifts for kids and for learners of any age, right? And two is like, I think we need to figure out how to rebrand how we think of teaching overall as a profession across the country, you know? I think we have accepted a notion that like if you cannot do anything else, you teach. And that is very much a part of like our cultural lexicon. It's very much a part of like you hear it everywhere, right? My parents, when I told them I was going to teach 19 years ago, thought I had just lost my mind and gone completely crazy, right? And I think that's because of like this underlying belief, right, about how we consider teaching. I think we need to reinvigorate that. I think we need to go back to basically where we once were, which is like, what does it take to be able to get teaching and to get working with kids to be our most sacred profession? And I think if we can re-elevate that, I actually think like this concept of leading and shaping would be in a fundamentally different place. So yeah.
I think the most important thing to me is respect for each other's knowledge. That is something which is very, very important to for learning to flourish actually. Because I have seen these complexities also among the literate people, the complexities which is happening between the illiterate and the literate. That's a big problem, you know, because that is validating the knowledge to be whether it's a knowledge or not, whether it's a education or not. So that need to be put at a equal level. Matlab, this is something that I always feel. This is something that I feel that it lacks in the schools actually. That much I need to add. Thank you.
Thank you so much, both. I think this has been great.
Yeah, we're on time. Please come visit us at Shishti. We'd love to host you. Love to continue this conversation, this dialogue, and more. I think we're truly enriched by you giving us your time, and love to host you and sort of continue deliberations of the world that we could create together. So thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all
Thank you.
for having us. Bye.
Bye.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you, Madan sir.
Bye. Bye.
I'm going to stop recording.